phone that day. Soichi Yasunaga was busy. Near the old Achinamazi JR station, there had been a heavy machinery accident due to a control error, and he had been dealing with the aftermath of the incident all day. It wasn't until around 5 o'clock in the evening that he checked his personal smartphone, which he had left in his command car. He was surprised to see roughly 20 missed calls, all from Hitomiko. She had been calling intermittently since early afternoon. Soichi's wife was a responsible woman, and she wouldn't contact him during work hours unless it was an emergency. He hurriedly called her back, but this time, Hitomiko didn't answer. "Sorry, I just checked my phone. Let's get in touch." He sent a short message and boarded a shuttle bus that was just leaving the excavation site. The bus was crowded with exhausted workers, excavators, operators, precision cleaners, and repairmen who had all toiled for a full day. Soichi felt a throbbing pain behind his eyes and massaged his forehead with his fingers. His smartphone vibrated in the chest pocket of his lightweight summer jacket. It was a call from Hitomiko. Fortunately, the bus was approaching the next bus stop. Soichi answered the phone while pressing the disembarkation button. He was the only one who got off the bus, but a long queue had formed at the bus stop. Tired and exasperated faces. "I've gotten off the bus, so we can talk now. What's wrong?" Soichi inquired as he distanced himself from the line of people. "It's about Kaho." His wife's response was oddly quiet. Despite the quiet surroundings and the absence of background noise, he wondered what was going on. "It's a bit hard to hear, but is this better?" It became a little clearer. "I'm at the Bureau of Mirror World Affairs in Naoyama 3 Chamet. It's an essential division. Kaho's high school falls under their jurisdiction." Listening up to that point, Soichi finally realized what was happening. His wife's weakened voice indicated she was frightened. What happened? In the brief moment between his question and her response, Soichi's mind conjured an image of his only daughter. She was 17 years and 7 months old. For the past 2 years, she hadn't shown a smile at home. Most of the time, she was either angry or sullen, openly displaying disdain for her father, a modest excavation site supervisor, and her mother, who only knew how to cling to her father's way of life. Always wearing that carefree expression. Do Mom and Dad even understand what a difficult time we are living in? They're just peaceful fools. Youthful, healthy sarcasm and sharp words. She's going through a sensitive age, just a bit emotionally unstable due to adolescence. Her parents should understand and support her warmly. Soichi and Hitomiko had tried to do just that. However, parents are human too. Sometimes they can get worn down by the feeling of futility. Hitomiko seemed to continue her efforts to connect with their daughter, but Soichi had grown tired. Lately, he tried to avoid overlapping with Kenho's living hours as much as possible. They didn't speak to each other, let alone look at each other's faces. The image of the little girl who used to ask for bedtime stories every night and had her eyes light up with excitement at his amateurish card tricks had completely vanished from their current daughter. "Here." "Huh?" "That girl is being held here," Hitomiko whispered. "The day before yesterday, there was a terrorist bombing at the Parliament building in the second mirror world, and it seems Akaho was involved with the group responsible for it. Come to think of it, someone mentioned the terrorist incident at the site this morning. Or was it yesterday morning? It was news from the other world, so he didn't pay much attention to it. That's a big problem, but our Kaho has nothing to do with it." "Yeah, but there's a possibility that the Kaho from the other side might try to seek refuge here. It was said that the hideout of the group had equipment for crossing into unauthorized realms, forged documents, personal data, and more. So what's the point of her seeking refuge here? They might try to impersonate our Kaho. Therefore, the Bureau of Mirror World Affairs is taking precautions by securing the Kaiho's custody, so they can immediately arrest and detain the Kaho from the second mirror world if she shows up. Even though they claim it's for the protection of our Kaho, I believe it's detention." Hiramoko's voice became hoarse. Soichi pressed his hand to his forehead. The pain behind his eyes didn't ease. It had happened during a hot summer just like this year. The world had changed due to an unexpected catastrophe. There were significant changes that were far from the everyday lives of ordinary people, as well as subtle but unsettling shifts that affected their daily lives. This was a global scale change, but not all countries were equally affected. Some nations were shaken to their very foundations, while others remained virtually untouched. These disparities were a result of the differences in the original political systems of these countries rather than the magnitude of the damage they suffered. 7 years ago, on August 10 at 1:40 p.m., the world's largest quantum accelerator, the Lambron, located on a remote island in the Arctic Ocean, experienced an unexplained explosion, causing the disappearance of approximately 30 unfortunate technicians and researchers who were working inside. This was the first catastrophe. At that time, Soichi and Hiramoko were in their 12th year of marriage and lived in a tranquil town in the suburbs of Tokyo. Soichi worked for a local construction company, and they lived in a rented apartment provided by the company with their 4th grade daughter, Kaho. During Kaho's summer vacation, she frequented the school's outdoor pool, getting a deep tan except for her eyes and teeth, and was full of energy. The initial explosion of the Lambron occurred at 1 hour, 40 minutes, and 32 seconds p.m., and 4 minutes later, a second stage explosion followed. Subsequently, explosive destruction events continued in a chain of 17 stages, finally coming to an end at 3:49 p.m., 2 hours and 8 minutes later. On that day, Soichi had taken an early vacation and was at home. When he first felt the faint swing, he thought, "It's an earthquake," but he didn't say it out loud. However, Hiramiko, who was in the kitchen at the time, briefly said, "It's shaking," and turned off the stove. Kaho had just returned from a swimming class at the pool that day and was napping on the living room sofa. Short cropped hair, a bold sleeping posture, a band-aid right next to the outer corner of her right eye, helping to heal a wound. Hiramiko quickly maneuvered around the counter kitchen and approached Kaho. Soichi also moved closer to his wife and child, naturally assuming a protective posture. Then, a strong jolt hit them. Soichi's immediate thought was of a time earlier that summer when the family had visited a nearby amusement park. They had ridden the oldest roller coaster in the county, and when the ride had jolted and jerked, Hiramiko had said, "I'm going to bite my tongue," and Kaho had laughed, saying, "My tailbone hurts." She had just learned the word tailbone and seemed eager to use it, which had been amusing. Soichi tensed his whole body, thinking a big shake was coming. However, the shaking stopped at that point. The mobile of tropical fish hung by the living room window swayed as if being shaken by a child's hand, but it gradually settled down. Tink. A high-pitched noise began. Soichi looked at his wife. She met his gaze, and with one hand, she touched her own ear and shook her head. "What is this?" In the space between husband and wife, Kaho, who had just woken up from her nap, put on a surprisingly serious face. "There's a weird sound, isn't there?" she said. Since then, the tinnitus that had never stopped for even a second had become one of the characteristic mirror world-related anxieties, and nowadays, there were fewer people deeply concerned about it. Everyone in this world had to get used to more significant changes. It wasn't just a simple earthquake. What was profoundly shaken and rattled at its core was her very perception of reality. Beyond the dimensional rift created by the explosion of the Lambron, there existed parallel worlds to her own. Two worlds that were mirror images of each other, recognized as each other's mirror world due to their near-perfect similarity. While there was no hierarchical distinction in existence, for convenience, the world where Soichi and the others lived, which had created the basis for this understanding, was called the first mirror world. And the parallel world was known as the second mirror world. Since then, everyone had a counterpart in the other world. From the perspective of the first mirror world, there was a counterpart in the second mirror world, and vice versa. Their life paths could lead them in different directions, and it wasn't uncommon for one to be deceased in one world while alive in the other. Nonetheless, the fact that these counterparts existed was undeniable. However, the chances of these two counterparts meeting are very limited. The site of the collapsed Lombrun has become a restricted area under the jurisdiction of the International Union of Sciences, and the general public is not allowed to approach it. The only entities permitted to travel between the two worlds from this location are a handful of international organizations that have obtained permission within the scope of agreements between this world's scientific union and that of the other world. At least, that's the official story. In reality, there are plenty of capitalists who are greedy for the markets and resources embedded in both worlds, inquisitive journalists and adventurers, as well as the underground traders who deal in goods and know-how that are always in demand under any societal conditions. Consequently, the unauthorized crossings utilizing the dimensional portals, which number over a dozen at the site of the Lombrun, have become an open secret. Both governments and international organizations in both worlds are well aware of this, which is why they have established and operate organizations like the Bureau of Mirror World Affairs. This organization is designed to determine which world an individual belongs to, whether the first or the second mirror world. As far as Soichi knew, if an ordinary citizen from this world were to attempt to secretly cross into the second mirror world through this channel, they would incur substantial economic and social risks. Therefore, encounters with their own counterpart were by no means an easy featuring. Nonetheless, Kaho seemed to have found herself in a rare and unexpected predicament. It was only natural for Hitomiko to be frightened. I'll head there too. I know you must be feeling vulnerable, but please hold on a little longer. As he ended the call, a few warm raindrops fell on the screen of his smartphone and Soichi's forehead. The Central Division of the Bureau of Mirror World Affairs wasn't located in the building in Aoyama 3 Chama that Hitomiko had mentioned. Instead, it occupied the entire building. In other words, the Central Division was the territory of the Second Mirror World. Its internal functions, akin to those of an embassy with extraterritoriality, came to fit the First Mirror World. Understanding this made things simpler. The building's front had an entrance, and several guards were standing inside the automatic glass doors. They were not security personnel, they were military. They wore dark brown camouflage helmets with cold, goggle-covered faces. Moreover, they were armed. Although the rifles they held resembled A-47s from action movies, the barrels were short. There was no need for live ammunition because energy guns were prohibited in this world. Soichi took a deep breath and walked towards the entrance. He noticed the white text the mirror on the sentinels' helmets, the chest of their camouflage uniforms just above the heart, and the rifle straps at prominent locations. The United Diplomatic Federation of the Second Mirror World appeared to have reservations about terms like Second Mirror World for their side and First Mirror World for ours. So all agencies established in our world adopted this term on their uniforms. The mirror didn't denote any order. However, all the countries on Earth in the Second Mirror World weren't uniformly assertive. The United States there had roughly the same history as the United States in the First Mirror World, with the exception of Alaska as an independent nation and half of Mexico as a state. Russia retained its former Soviet status and became a multi-ethnic economic superpower. In the Second Mirror World, the Middle Eastern countries weren't the powder keg of international conflicts. They safeguarded their distinct cultures, religions, and beliefs by establishing united national entities. There was one exception: Japan. In the Second Mirror World, Japan followed a typical form of totalitarianism, with a military regime that had dominated over the citizens for more than 80 years. As a result, anti-government armed organizations were active, and incidents like explosions in the parliament building were not uncommon. As Soichi passed the heavily armed guards, he greeted them. "I'm here on business. I'm just a regular citizen, not a threat." However, the guard turned to face Soichi, and behind the goggles, their eyes were inscrutable, making Soichi break out in a cold sweat. They were not easy to deal with. but the guard gave a slight shoulder movement, deliberately making way for him. Soichi hurried forward, his heart still racing. He entered the automatic doors and found the lobby packed with all sorts of people. There were men and women in business suits, young individuals in jeans, faded t-shirts, and sandals, elderly folks with canes, young mothers with children, and a group of female students in white tops, pleated skirts, and bow ties, standing together like timid little animals with red eyes, suggesting they had been crying. Were their parents, children, husbands, wives, friends, or teachers detained at this Bureau of Mirror World Affairs? Was Kato among them? Soichi's legs went weak. What can I assist you with? Soichi heard the inquiring voice from behind, and when he turned around, he saw the dark goggles approaching very closely. Unlike the guard from earlier, Soichi, a middle-aged man of average build and height, appeared smaller in comparison to this guard in both height and width. The dense beard had been properly shaved, but there was still a hint of stubble under the nose, around the mouth, and on the chin, appearing bluish. I received a notification. As he spoke, sweat started to break out on his face. My daughter is here. Please line up at counter 2. The stubbled man spoke, moving one hand away from the energy gun and making a sweeping gesture with that hand. His gloves had sturdy buckle fasteners, appearing to be made of leather, but they were not. It was a special fiber that wouldn't be damaged by any chemical substance, even in absolute zero temperatures, or dissolve when exposed to lava. This fiber was unique to the second mirror world and had been under discussion for years by our International Trade Federation, but it was still under embargo, with the source materials and manufacturing processes unknown. This building had been a regular office building before they took over, complete with a front desk, office furniture, decorative potted plants, and floral arrangements. Now, those office supplies and decorations had been removed, and in one corner of the barren floor, there were 3 reception windows separated by cheap resin panels. 3 female receptionists sat side by side, with neatly combed hair, dressed in khaki uniforms. Their reception was efficient, businesslike, devoid of smiles or friendliness. Each window had a sign above it. The first said identification, the second was meetings, and the third was return of confiscated items. Soichi was concerned about his daughter's situation, so he quickly went to the second reception window. This was understandable, but he wondered what had caused this crowding and confusion. The waiting area lacked chairs and any sort of organization. There were no dividers to form lines, no number tags, and no guides available for inquiries. The scene he found himself in was like something out of foreign news reports: a gathering of refugees at airports and border crossings in other countries, fleeing political unrest in their home countries. It felt powerless and helpless. There was a moment when Soichi's anger flared up, but it quickly faded, leaving only a smoky sense of unease and restlessness. If someone attempted to cut in line, Soichi would politely discourage them. When approached by people who were bewildered and had questions, he could only respond, "I'm sorry, I ain't sure either. We can't just queue and wait here." Soichi would reluctantly ignore those who were exhausted and sitting on the ground. After 1 hour and 13 minutes, he finally heard his name called at counter 2. "How can I assist you?" Upon closer examination, it was clear that this staff member, sounding rather hoarse, was not like a figure skater but more like an old coach. "I heard that my daughter was brought here for personal protection this afternoon. Her name is Kaho Yasunaga, a 17-year-old high school student. Even though they were not in the same mirror world, as long as they were from the same country or shared the same ethnicity, the language remained the same. It was called the mirror world because it was an identical world as if reflected in a mirror." Although he knew this, it was like unconsciously starting a conversation with a foreign friend, saying each word carefully. "Kaho Yasunaga. Go through the door inside and head to the 3rd floor waiting room. Remember to bring this." Finally, he received something like a number card, which was number 127. I'm sorry. My wife should have arrived before me. Then they will prioritize based on the order of arrival. Next, please. She referred to the door inside as the security gate set up in front of the elevator hall of the building. It reminded Soichi of nothing but the enclosures used to chase livestock. They entered from one side of the lobby, went through the maze-like enclosures meant for security checks, and reached the side of the elevator hall. Soichi felt like a sheep about to be sheared, or a pig about to be slaughtered. The key point is that although the security checks were similar to those at an airport, when Soichi and the others passed through the enclosures, they were closely watched by the armed guards. The muzzles of their energy guns were pointed at Soichi's chest, which was completely different from the past. Every step they took triggered images or numerical values on devices like desktop computers in the elevator hall, and technicians in white coats closely monitored the changes on the screens. They scanned Soichi and the others, and it was unclear whether the cameras were hidden in the ceiling or under the floor. Under normal circumstances, they couldn't see the cameras while walking, but there were no people brave enough to stop and look for them here. Long live the military regime! Soichi felt both amused and frustrated inside, but he remained silent and took the elevator to the third floor. He couldn't show any hint of displeasure on his face. He maintained a bright and serene expression, as if he were out for a leisurely walk. You always look so carefree. To transition into a stable life path as smoothly as possible, such an expression was essential. Kaho couldn't comprehend it yet. Would this incident be the opportunity for her to escape the quagmire of adolescence? Would Kaho now be fearful of the military-dominated authoritarian society in the other mirror world? The door opened, and a rush of cold air hit her, as if the air conditioning were on. In the brightly lit room at the front of the lobby, there were also reception counters and neatly arranged resin public benches. A quick glance revealed that the benches were empty, and above the front row of benches hung a sign pointing to the restrooms. Honey. Hiramiko was waiting by the entrance to the room, and as she saw me, she hurried over, dressed in a summery striped shirt, tight pants, and lace-up sandals. We still can't meet Kaho. As soon as she spoke, sweat formed on her temples, and tears trickled from her left eye. Soichi grabbed his wife's hand. It was a sweaty but warm hand. Hiramiko's hands were always warm. Even during the harsh winter, you could use them as heaters. A person with a cold heart has warm hands. I am a cold-blooded human, so my hands are warm. Hiramiko always likes to make such jokes, and the only one who hears her jokes is Soichi, her partner for nearly 20 years. Regardless of the occasion, she is usually silent, reserved, and shy. But like her heart, her hands are warm. Soichi understands this better than anyone. Sorry I'm late, Soichi said as he wrapped his arms around his wife's shoulders. Let's wait in this chaotic scene for now. Look, the reception window is displaying the numbers. To his surprise, the numbers were flipped by hand, and it was now at number 45. They're still using this antique? In the second mirror world's Japan, it's still the Showa era. Soichi made a joking remark, but Hiramiko looked embarrassed. From numbers 41 to 45, it'll probably take 2 hours. She was holding number 68. Compared to number 127, they were much closer now. Anyway, let's sit down and wait. Would you like something to drink? I'll go get it. You say that, but I just noticed. There aren't even beverage vending machines here, and there isn't even a water cooler. The only facility to address the physiological needs of the people waiting here for a long time is the restroom. Hail to the military regime. I'm fine. You, though, you look tired. Your complexion isn't great, and your eyes are so red. This morning, I was at the Achinama Zoo incident site. I've been involved in the cleanup all day. Probably got some dust in my eyes. Lombran disappeared from the surface after the big explosion, and around 25 hours later, this world, the first mirror world, returned to the stage. taking approximately 79 hours. The quantum accelerator apparatus, buildings, the people inside the buildings, and even the coffee machine left in their resting place all turned into fine white dust, intricately mixed together. Just as the literal meaning implies, it fell from the sky to the ground. The density of the dust varied depending on the weather and geographical conditions at the time, but nearly all countries and regions in the Northern Hemisphere observed this phenomenon. People referred to this phenomenon as the Snow of Lambrun, but actually, it was clearer and colder than snow-white dust. In some local areas, white dust fell like heavy rainfall over a short period, transforming everything, whether organic or inorganic, into semi-transparent crystalline minerals. In the first Mirror Worlds Japan, the Snow of Lambrun visited 49 locations. 16 of these were within Tokyo's city limits, including the old Tokyo Stock Exchange building in Keibucho, the area around the former Achinamizu JR station, and the vicinity of Nakashira Park. The suburbs of Hichichi City and the southeastern parts of the Chichibu mountain range also suffered substantial dust fall, and the affected area exceeded the size of the region affected by the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami. People were victims as well, and since individuals could disappear, even 7 years later, it was impossible to determine the exact number of casualties. The construction company where Soichi Yasunaka worked did not survive the unexpected wave of the Mirror World era. A year after the explosion, the company began its reorganization, transforming into a semi-official, semi-private organization specialized in excavation and restoring items in dust-fall-affected areas. The rescue efforts in affected areas began with recovering bodies and then retrieving personal belongings. Although these belongings had turned into mineral-like substances resembling frosted glass, this was a sensitive and delicate task. Few individuals with experience in civil engineering and construction like Soichi applied for these roles, so he was hired on the day he submitted his resume. Soichi had always worked diligently. He was often dispatched to various inspection sites, but the task duration around the old Achinamizu station was the longest he had ever been involved in. It took 7 years to complete the excavation and restoration of bodies, as most of the mineralized remains were damaged. Professional machinery was now being used for excavation, both for analyzing the disaster and researching methods to reverse mineralization. This added complexity to the operations required careful handling. The Snow of Lambrun fell for only those 79 hours, and no similar disaster occurred thereafter. However, even today, the excavation site still produces significant amount of fine dust, which was harmful to the human body. The excavation team was fully equipped, and part of Soichi's job was to prepare the sites, making it easier for them to work. When necessary, they had to clear away everything except for the rescue subjects, as well as manipulate heavy machinery. This meant that Soichi sometimes ended up with minor injuries like red eyes and frostbite on his nails, but he never paid much attention to them. Nevertheless, despite these challenges, his wife's outlook remained optimistic. The two of them sat side by side on the sturdy wooden bench, holding hands tightly, watching the number plates flipping back and forth like relics from the Showa era. Soichi and Hitomiko loved children, and after they got married, they had planned to have 3 kids. Ideally, they had hoped for 2 boys and a girl. Unfortunately, their ideal scenario never materialized, and they ended up with just 1 child, Kaho, whom they cherished as their precious jewel. She was an incredibly energetic child. Since her early childhood, she was more mischievous than the boys around her, fearless of danger, and hardly ever sick. She was constantly accumulating new scratches and bruises. It's worth mentioning that on the day of the Lambrun explosion incident, she had a band-aid near the corner of her right eye. A few days earlier, she had gotten into a fight with a boy who had been bullying kids at her swimming class. He was a larger kid from her grade who came with 2 sidekicks, notorious for tormenting the quiet girls and timid boys. Her best friend was being harassed by these guys at the edge of the swimming pool. They were about to undress her, and that's when Kato yelled at them to stop. In response, the bullies wielded their swimming goggles with needles attached to them and attacked Kaiho's face. The straps of the goggles had needles, which left a cut near the soft corner of Kaiho's eye. Kaho clenched her fists and fought back, giving the lead bully quite a beating. Hiromiko received a call from the homeroom teacher and rushed to the school. The boy who had been bullied had regained consciousness and was crying in the infirmary. Kaho had a band-aid representing a warrior's medal attached by the school nurse, appearing confident and proud. The parents of the boy who had bullied her were no saints themselves and tried to find faults when handling the situation later. However, that boy had specifically aimed at Kaiho's eyes from the beginning when he swung the goggles. "I regret not breaking that guy's eyes," he said excitedly, which played into her hands. Kaho had a small but indelible scar near the corner of her eye, and the bully's authority was drastically diminished. Setting aside the fainting incident by the call, choosing to forget wasn't necessarily the best course of action. From the bottom of his heart, Soichi felt that the situation was satisfactory. Hiromiko remained silent as usual, her smile unchanged. Kaho had publicly declared in front of the whole class, "No matter how many times, I'll still stand up for what's right." She was asked by the teacher to stay and write a reflection. Kaho's bravery and strength were innate qualities. She possessed a natural determination to combat bullying and injustice, and her intelligent mind recognized that a direct and reckless approach could be dangerous. Therefore, when she entered middle school, she joined a sports club to build her physical strength. She maintained above-average grades, had numerous friends, and earned the trust of her teachers. Her life in middle school was harmonious, and she adapted well. When it was time for high school entrance exams, Kaho aimed for a school where she could enjoy life despite her academic performance. Her wish came true, and she entered a school known for its foundation in computer science and a renowned light music club. Kaho began to learn how to play the snare drum, dabbled in introductory programming, and dedicated herself to building her muscle strength by working out at the student discounted gym. Kaho had an agile mind, quick reflexes, an indomitable spirit, and strong initiative. Countless times, her parents, Soichi and Hiromiko, marveled at her incredible, resilient, and candid personality, pondering which genes she had inherited from them to possess such qualities. She taught those bullies a lesson they'd never forget, and after making amends with their parents, the couple secretly rejoiced. Although Kaho might have been a bit too extreme in her actions, she was right. In various senses, Soichi was far from being overbearing, and Hiromiko wasn't that sharp in many aspects either. Kaho was indeed the extraordinary eagle born in a nest of sparrows. Even so, Soichi and Hiromiko, who are Kaho's parents, always loved their daughter and felt proud of her. Their love was untainted by any lies, no matter when. However, once Kaho entered the second year of junior high school, the belated rebellious phase arrived. During this period, their strong-willed daughter began to grow tired of her parents. It wasn't just a simple "I hate you." "Mom and Dad, do you know what this is called? It's called the inaction of cowards. Why do you have to apologize for me? Why can't you share my anger with me?" Scorn and disillusionment intertwined, making it an unfortunate beginning for both sides. When they called number 60, the fireproof door behind the counter opened, and a middle-aged man in a suit appeared. He called Soichi and Hiromiko's names. "You've waited a long time. You're the parents of Kaho Yasunaga, right? You can meet your daughter now. However, as you know, there's a limitation on the number of people who can cross over within a day, and only one of you can go in." This was a rule set forth in the international agreement that governed the official routes between the first and second mirror worlds. Limitation. Perhaps due to exhaustion, Hiromiko's brain seemed to glitch. The point she should have been surprised about wasn't this. Soichi asked the man in the suit, "So, does that mean we can see our daughter after this and cross to the Arctic Circle to reach the second mirror world from here?" In the Bureau of Mirror World Affairs building, There were dimensional portals and similar channels, but these facts were never publicly disclosed. This was likely because this place enjoyed extraterritorial rights. The man in the suit didn't verbally answer Soichi's question. Instead, he widened his eyes slightly and stared directly at Soichi and Hiromiko's faces. What should they do? See their daughter? Was it also okay not to see her? Honey? Hiromiko was in a state of confusion. The Arctic Circle? Do we need to go to such a distant place? Oh, no. There's no need to go there, Soichi gently replied. It's just that Kaho's body is in the second mirror world. Perhaps she was immediately transferred after being protected. Before Kaho from over there came here, she ensured the safety of Kaho on this side. So, in order to see her, we also need to go to the second mirror world. However, there's a limitation on the number of people, so we can't go together. It's unfortunate, but that's how it's regulated. Seeing Soichi's compliant actions, the man in a suit, who had a foreign affairs responsibility ID hanging on his chest, slowly raised an eyebrow, as if he had accidentally heard something careless. Oh? What's with that look? Soichi hadn't said anything particularly interesting. Is Kaho unable to come home yet? For this question, please consult with the responsible person over there. Does she have food and drink over there? Can we send them from this side? Hiromiko's voice carried a hint of trembling, and the man in the suit coldly glanced at her. This, too, should be discussed with the other side. We have no further information. Understood. Hiromiko, I'll go then. Soichi looked into his wife's eyes, nodding with an encouraging expression. Hiromiko, who usually had "it's okay," understood, and helped me, honey at the ready whenever there was something on her mind or a problem to solve, was different from her usual self. I'll go. She gritted her teeth, took a step forward, and gently pushed Soichi aside. I'll go. Because I'm her mother. The foreign affairs responsible person's gaze turned even colder, disinterested, and without any need for concealment. Crossing into the mirror world carries risks. It's better if I go, Soichi urgently said to the responsible person. I'll go. In that case, Soichi Yasunaga, please come this way. The responsible person had already started walking away. Soichi pushed his wife's shoulders, smiling. We will definitely meet her. Perhaps, in order to come back with Kaho, I might stay over there for a while. So, Hiromiko, you should go home first. I'm not going back. I'll wait here for you. Before Soichi could finish his sentence, Hiromiko cut in, grabbing Soichi's wrist tightly. We have to come back together. Bring our child back, for sure. Soichi was taken aback, and the strength of his wife's hands dug deep into his wrist through the thin jacket fabric. He could understand Hiromiko's worry and distress, but her emotional reaction was so unlike her. Is there any reason for this? He was about to ask, but quickly swallowed his words. There had to be a reason. Soichi tried to remember the last time he had a serious conversation with Kano. 3 months ago? No, it had been longer. It had been over 6 months. Both Soichi and Kaho were avoiding each other, hiding behind their respective walls. In the middle of it all, Hiromiko couldn't help but feel the pain of their strange relationship. Would Kato be happy to see a father like this under these circumstances? Could she be at ease? Hiromiko was deeply concerned. We must bring her back. Soichi placed his hand on Hiromiko's hand and slowly withdrew it, saying, Kaho is my daughter. She is more important to me than my own life. Soichi went through the security check of his personal belongings in the first room, peeking at the X-ray images produced by the equipment, like a fundus examination, and passed through the arch of the metal detector. There, he bid farewell to the head of external affairs, and Soichi walked alone towards the sealed door. Upon hearing the release of the sealed air, the door opened vertically, revealing a small, square room filled with bright white fluorescent light. There was another sealed door on the opposite wall, and aside from that, There were no supplies or machinery. The ceiling, walls, and floor of the small room were all very smooth and illuminated with a white, radiant light. Soichi approached the front sealed door, and it opened automatically with a swish. He stepped through, and the door closed behind him. He found himself in another identical, brilliantly lit room. As he continued through one room after another, he lost count after reaching 20. It felt eerie, almost as if he was wandering through a narrow passage in the interdimensional space. Soichi wondered if he should call out to the head of external affairs or shout towards the wall outside. Blame it on the blinding white fluorescent light, which distorted his perception of the spatial dimensions, making it all feel surreal. Whoosh! Suddenly, he emerged from a room identical in structure to the one where he had undergone the personal items check. Are you Mr. Soichi Yasunaga? Stepping out was a young man in a police uniform, holding an ID card. Please wear this on your chest. Kaho Yasunaga is ahead. Have I already crossed over to the other side? His brain felt dizzy and disoriented. May I ask, where is this? I cannot provide you with a specific location, but this is the Public Security Bureau building. The Bureau of Public Security? I thought it was the Bureau of Mirror World Affairs. So, this is the second Mirror World, correct? In the first Mirror World's Japan, does the National Bureau of Public Security not exist? Is this acceptable to you? Let's keep moving forward. The uniformed police officer had short hair, cleanly shaven at the nape of the neck. He stood up first and walked confidently through the complex maze of passageways. Unlike the Central Division's foreign affairs officials, there was a noticeable sense of friendliness here. My daughter should be under the protection of the Bureau of Mirror World Affairs. Why is she in the Bureau of Public Security? They occasionally passed by people in similar police uniforms, both young and older, and the uniformed officer guiding Soichi greeted them with a crisp salute. The corridor seemed exceptionally long, the ceiling high, and the number of rooms was astonishing. The Bureau of Public Security was indeed a large and complex organization. Is your daughter Yasunaga Kaho from the first Netherworld? We need to verify her identity based on facial recognition and the Bureau of Mirror World Affairs detection results. With a concise response, the uniformed officer began to climb the stairs at a brisk pace. Soichi followed closely behind and quickly found himself out of breath. Facial recognition? We've arrested several suspects related to the explosion case, believed to be members of an anti-government organization. I confronted them with Kaho, and her reaction was clear. Soichi's steps faltered, and the uniformed police officer glanced at him, offering a hearty laugh. I just had her take a lie detector test. Well, it's easy to determine if memories have been tampered with through brainwave screening. Don't worry, your daughter doesn't know anyone from the anti-government organization. In other words, this has nothing to do with the Kaho from the first Mirror World. Finally, they reached the end of the stairs and stepped onto a level corridor. Soichi wiped the sweat from his forehead, appearing somewhat relaxed and relieved, and then he suddenly smiled. Brainwave spinning? They had some unusual technology here. Yet the outcome still relied on the old facial recognition. Is this guy your accomplice? Take a good look. Didn't this military regime just go in circles and end up back where they started? Thank you for your help. It's quite a long walk, isn't it? Our place is just too big. They turned around the final corner and arrived at a short corridor, which was at end 1011, 1012, 1013, 1014 were the room numbers displayed on the doors, with 2 doors on each side. The uniformed officer knocked on the door marked 1012 and said, "The visitor arrived." The door was reminiscent of something you might find in an old wooden ship, complete with a round window, and the handle was made of glass. It reminded Soichi of the technical high school he once attended. The door swung open to reveal a room about 4.5 tatami mats in size. In the center, there was a chair that evoked images of a dental examination chair, along with various medical equipment. Kaho was seated in the chair. dressed in a sunflower yellow sleeveless shirt and trousers, with a headband connected to several thin wires on her head. Bands were wrapped around her wrists and secured her upper body with a safety harness. A footrest slightly elevated her lower body. Next to the chair, a woman in a white lab coat stood holding a folder and a pen. Both of them had composed expressions, and the woman in the lab coat had a faint smile on her lips. "Dad." Kaho looked in their direction and whispered softly. A wire from the headband was resting on her right eye, where a scar from the glorious summer of 7 years ago, when she defeated her bullies, still remained. Suddenly, Soichi felt faint. It had been so long since Kaho had referred to him as Dad. It felt like he was peering through a pinhole, and everything except Kaiho's face became dark. She had the build of Hitomiko and the facial features of Soichi. They had been saying that since she was a baby. Recently, Soichi had heard from Hitomiko that Kaho had cut her hair short, and it suited her very well. Indeed, it did suit her very well. "This is the visitor," Soichi Yasunaga, the uniformed officer, introduced, and the woman in the white coat greeted him with a friendly smile. "You arrived just in time. All the tests are finished." "Thank you," Kaho said. It was her voice, her daughter's voice. Across from Kaiho's chair, there was a large glass window with the suspects detained behind it. The tests had already concluded, and they were still waiting there. He probably couldn't stand up by himself. He was tied to a folding chair, his head lolling to the side, his face bruised and bloodied. In this state, even a friend wouldn't recognize him. He was a young man, probably around the same age as the uniformed officer who had guided them. He wore a sports tank top, which was also stained with blood and sweat, and khaki-colored trousers. He was barefoot, and both of his toes were caked with blood. Soichi couldn't even bear to think about how this had happened. "Oh? I'm sorry." The woman in the white coat noticed Soichi's gaze and expression, hurriedly operating a machine at her side. The light on the other side of the glass window went out, and the face of the young man, black and swollen, became invisible. Even so, you could still make out the silhouette of the dying young man in the darkness. "We're about to use this room for the next person's test. We just received orders to go to the security department's small meeting room." The white-clad woman spoke to the uniformed officer, who leaned in closer to her, speaking quickly in hushed tones. The almond-shaped eyes of the white-clad woman widened, and they both started to laugh softly. In the officer's eyes, there was a mischievous glint, quite different from the expression he'd had a moment ago. "Hey, it's quite different here," the white-clad woman whispered. The uniformed officer was hiding something behind his cheerful demeanor. They both glanced at Soichi, exchanging sly glances. Was this an inside joke that outsiders like Soichi weren't supposed to understand? Doesn't matter now. What matters is the world of darkness on the other side of the glass. Those bloodied feet are still there. They're just not visible at the moment. Kaho looked at Soichi. Her face was drained of color, with tear streaks down her cheeks. Even if they weren't acquaintances or friends, it was impossible for a 17-year-old girl to remain composed while watching a young man who had been arrested, interrogated, and dragged out for a facial recognition check. The hot blood within Soichi began to boil in his veins. "Kaho, come out, come home. Daddy's here to take you back. No matter what you've been fighting for, no matter what you've been resisting, I'm here to bring you back to Mom. All this military rule and everything else is just garbage. Watch your step," the white-clad woman said, extending her hand to help Kaho get off the chair. Right behind her, a mobile intravenous drip stand was set up. Wires from the folder wrapped around it, making it look less intimidating. At that moment, the light started moving along the edge of the IV stand. It began as individual dots of light and then formed a line that continued to descend. Now, the light took a 90-degree turn, becoming a horizontal line. Kaho stepped down from the chair and stood straight, adjusting her clothes. The white-clad woman showed the folder to the uniformed officer, and the two of them appeared to be discussing something. The light continued to extend upwards, and now Soichi could see it taking shape. It was a rectangular opening that a person could bend down and pass through. The light closed, and the rectangular opening was complete. Mr. Yasunaga, let's... Before the words go were fully spoken, the uniformed officer sensed something unusual. Soichi held his breath. The rectangular beam of light that had appeared in midair vanished, and from the depth of the rectangle, another beam of light shot out. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Soichi heard the sound of an energy gun firing for the first time in his life. 2 shots hit the uniformed officer's right shoulder and right elbow, while 1 shot struck the left shoulder of the white-clad woman. Impacted by the energy bullets, both of them were blown against the wall and lost consciousness. At the same time, a foot and safety boots extended from the rectangular space. Soichi felt a sense of urgency, as if he were swimming in a dream. He hurriedly held Kaho, who was standing there in shock. Kaho's face and the front of her clothing were splattered with blood. The owner of the foot and safety boots held an energy gun in her hand while cradling Soichi. She shook her head vigorously, tossing her annoying bangs to the side, her hair styled in a wavy bob, adorned with streaks of fluorescent blue. She was dressed in a khaki-colored jacket and work pants. The jacket seemed well worn, showing signs of wear around the collar and elbows, while the work pants had paint splatters and oil stains. Her hairstyle and clothing were different, and of course, the most significant difference was the energy gun and safety boots. But this was Kano. This was also Kaho, and the evidence was in her widened eyes as she looked at Soichi. She yelled, "It shouldn't be true. Why is Dad here?" "Dad, I'm sorry. When I entered middle school, I decided not to call you and Mom anymore. But then, it just slipped out. I was a bit surprised, though. It felt like I was back in my childhood for a moment. Regarding the father on this side, I call him father like the other members. But only I occasionally call him Dad, and father accepts it readily. I am the real Kaho from the first mirror world. However, from now on, I will live as Kaho in the second mirror world. The father in the second mirror world is the leader of the anti-government organization. He is one of the organization's oldest founding members and is called Father. My mother was also a member, but she perished in a suicide terrorist attack 2 years ago, just one day before the 15th birthday of both Kaihos. She drove a truck loaded with explosives into the National Army General Staff Headquarters. I feel a little, just a little, sympathy for my mother in that matter. Being the wife of Father, it's a position that naturally demands loyalty, with no room for escape. I don't quite understand it. Maybe my mom also rushed in there with fervent beliefs. My mother left behind a last will, instructing her daughter Kaho to follow her path. However, in the end, being the wife of the father, as a couple that produced the father's own flesh and blood, it should be fate. But the real Kaho of the second mirror world is a person with a timid personality, incapable of shouldering such a heavy burden. Both parents were active militants in armed struggle. How can they have given birth to such a daughter? Or perhaps, this was an unfortunate encounter? Just like the real me in the first mirror world. I've been competitive from childhood to adulthood, while my parents were content, honest, and hardworking laborers, almost like sheep. Perhaps we were just born in the wrong place. Maybe it would be more fitting to switch places. Do you still remember? Dad, do you remember? When I was a child, I used to gaze intently at card magic tricks. You even bought bicycle playing cards for serious practice, the same kind that professional magicians use. However, as you got busier with work, it naturally fell by the wayside, and we were left with the old set of cards. My friends and I used it for games like Crazy Eights or Solitaire. The patterns on the cards were all the same, only the colors were slightly different. The set of cards you used, if you removed the damaged ones and kept the intact ones, you'd have a complete set with just a few cards that had the same patterns but different colors. Using them to determine a winner was quite strange, wasn't it? The me from the first mirror world and the second mirror world. Aren't we just like those cards with different colors? We share the same patterns as most people in the world we were born into, but the colors are different, and they don't match. Everyone around us understands this, and I understand it better than anyone. It's a harsh reality that can't be hidden. So, I want to return to the deck of cards that originally belonged to me. The other Kaho, she must be thinking the same. In the second mirror world, after my mother's death, the father quickly grew disheartened with the timid and useless Kaho and immediately began searching for me in the first mirror world. No matter which mirror world it is, she's still my daughter. Then, the father also discovered that me from this world is the true daughter that father deserves. I fulfill my late wife's last wish, possess the ability to inherit her legacy, and have the courage to carry it forward. During the spring break before entering high school, I became a member of the organization. At that time, the other Kaho from the second mirror world also arrived here. She wasn't the daughter of the leader of a rebel organization, but rather a daughter born into a peaceful world, raised in an ordinary, hardworking family. This means that there was a demand that needed to be met with supply. Because I had to go through a necessary training period, that other Kaho completely took my place on my birthday this year. Dad, you prepared a birthday gift for me with such care, but you didn't come back when I woke up, did you? I understand, Dad. I'm really sorry. I always say such harsh words. I hate it. At first, I genuinely felt that my mom and dad had lived an overly dull life. Why did these unremarkable people have to be my parents? I was so frustrated. So, I started rebelling. Since the decision to become a member of the father in the second mirror world, I deliberately adopted the worst attitude. Because I felt I had to be tough, that I had to be the one to touch the wounds, since I was the one who was loathed and required to do so. The other Kaho from that side, replacing me, would certainly become a gentle, mature, and good child. She would respect her father, have a good relationship with her mother, and be the ideal daughter. The Kaho from that side also hoped to live such a life. So, Mom and Dad, you would finally think, Kaho's long period of rebellion has finally ended. Everyone would be happy. But no matter how well Mom calculated, she made a mistake. The experimentation phase was revealed before the complete replacement. Mom promised not to say anything to Dad, but we both fell to her knees and begged her desperately before completely taking over. Mom did nothing wrong. In both worlds, daughters wish to follow the path they long for. Mom silently guarded the secret. This wasn't a betrayal of Dad. So, please don't be angry. It's okay to be mad at me, but continue to cherish Mom as always. And, about the Kaho from the second mirror world, she's truly a fearful little crybaby. The slight injury on her right eye was made by the doctors from this side before she was fully replaced. Even though she knew it was necessary for me to have that scar, she still cried and sobbed. She's just an ordinary girl, not crazy like me. I abandoned the kindness I received for over 10 years to become father's daughter. But, Dad, in the second mirror world's Japan, most citizens' basic human rights are protected, and they live in difficult conditions, while only the upper class and a privileged few in the military regime enjoy a life of luxury. It's possible that the first mirror world's Japan also had such periods in its history. The freedoms and equality that exist in the first mirror world should also exist in the second mirror world. No matter which world it is, it's my homeland. That's why I've decided to fight for this cause. I clench my fists and give it my all. Someday, I will liberate this country in the second mirror world. I hope that by then, Mom and Dad will be proud of me. That would be wonderful. I'm sorry, Dad. The word Dad is really nice. But I won't be able to call you that anymore. It's a bit lonely. Goodbye. Father Yasunaga's loyal subordinate, Kaho Yasunaga, launched a rapid attack on 5 law enforcement officers to rescue her arrested comrades, carrying a dimension portal generator and an energy gun. After achieving her goal, she escaped. Soichi Yasunaga and his daughter Kaho Yasunaga from the first mirror world happened to arrive at the scene through dimension travel. After a 24-hour observation period, they were allowed to return to the first mirror world. The energy shot from the Kaho of the anti-government organization grazed Soichi Yasunaga's right shoulder, resulting in a shoulder injury. In fact, the Kaho from that side allowed Soichi and the Kaho from this side to lie down. To prevent Dad and you from being suspected, I have to fire. She said this and fired the gun. Soichi wanted to keep the image of his daughter in his eyes, and he stood up. Dad, I'm sorry. These were the last words of the Kaho from that side that Soichi heard. That Kaho is the daughter of the father Yasunaga, who is the top danger in the organization trying to overthrow the military regime. Their existence and activities are regularly monitored by the Bureau of Mirror World Affairs. If that's the case, the plan to switch identities was executed successfully. The Soichi and Hiramiko considered as this Kaho from the first mirror world would be under various forms of surveillance, and they wouldn't be able to escape completely. Soichi looked at the uniformed police officers of the Bureau of Public Security and the white-clad woman from the second mirror world. It's really different. Even though they were gently teasing each other, they were harmless people. So, the family of 3 planned to have a good conversation about this topic. Since Kaho's protection and Soichi's crossing had been going on for a month, the initial excitement had subsided. They didn't talk about it at home but decided to take a drive and spontaneously chose a destination by looking at a map. It was Hiramiko who chose a cabin-style resort at the southern tip of the Boso Peninsula. They have delicious food and hot springs where you can soak your feet. They spent one night here, and on the next morning, the 3 of them took a walk by the sea, chatting as they went. They told the truth, offered apologies, explained themselves, and then forgave each other. The second mirror world's Kaho was extremely afraid of her father, who seemed like a demon. Even though she was his biological daughter, she couldn't comprehend her father's beliefs and passion, especially when he was willing to risk his own life and demanded the same conviction, enthusiasm and courage from her. Because her father's faith was righteous, making him even more formidable than a demon. Kaho's fear and despair were something that Soichi and Hiramiko, who were ordinary citizens, could only understand as physical pain. I want to escape from father. I want to escape from the life that father exists in. Because of this, the real second mirror world's Kaho started to act very cautiously to achieve the replacement. Once the plan became more concrete, she refrained from contacting father's subordinates as she anticipated having to undergo the identity check involving facial recognition. She deliberately avoided any involvement with information related to the anti-government activities. However, even with this level of caution, that Kaho knew the construction of the dimensional portal generator she used when she attacked the Bureau of Public Security, as she had to use it several times to get to this side. The power source of the generator is the snow of Lambran. It's a result of the uncontrolled explosion of a quantum accelerator. A pure white harmful dust. I heard the snow of Lambran is being used to develop portable dimensional portal generators and is one of the best-selling items, traded on the black market from the first mirror world to the second mirror world by anti-government forces. So if you get hit by that stuff, your body rapidly chills. It can cause frostbite. Indeed, Dad is a professional in excavation, so he's well aware of this. Soichi glanced at the faint scar left on his fingernail. Kaho placed her palm over her dad's hand, and then Hiramiko joined in. They said nothing but smiled. When the replacement plan was exposed, Mom hugged me. It wasn't the real Kaho, but it was the one who hugged me. Those hands were as warm as the sun, and I'll always remember them. She must have been talking about becoming this mirror world's Kaho. I understand, Soichi said. In this world, there's only one Kaho with a different color. Kaho left a deck of cards that had the same color as her. But love didn't disappear. Soichi, even though he didn't say it, was always waiting with anticipation. Hiromiko was waiting with the same feelings. Someday, no matter how distant it might be, and even if they couldn't witness it, that day would surely come. It was the day when the Kaho from that world, together with her comrades, would overthrow the military regime of the second mirror world and fight for freedom and equality. It was the day when the two Kaihas could meet again with pride, both deserving to be called daughters equally. Soichi and Hiromiko would continue to protect their secret, living quietly, modestly, and peacefully until that day arrived. Even though they had been referred to as peaceful fools living a mundane life by their idealistic daughter from the other side and had been abandoned. According to the laws on that side, it seems both of us have committed the crime of national subversion. Hiromiko said suddenly one day. Here too, we violated the fundamental laws of the Mirror World Accord, Soichi added. We are a couple of criminals. We haven't been convicted yet. Just suspects. Oops, sorry. Seeing his wife's serene smile, Soichi fell into contemplation. The name Kaho was chosen by the couple after much deliberation. Near the obstetrics hospital, there was a vast water field, bathed in the brilliant summer sun, with mesmerizing waves of green leaf. They hoped that their daughter would grow up to be as beautiful and full of life as that scene. But Soichi had another idea. After considering Hiromiko's opinion that the name was too grand and lacked meaning, they quickly discarded it. This Kaho, on the other hand, might be more suitable for this name. A name represents the person, serving as a compass for the living individual. Indeed, as Hiromiko had mentioned, it was a grand name. Furthermore, it was a name known to all. However, when it was genuinely needed, people had to overcome many challenges to grasp it. That name is Kibal.